Okay, I think we're getting ready to roll here. It's a great time to welcome everybody to our virtual national conference series, the first ever. Want to congratulate the conference team that's been working so hard on this. I mean, they were willing to take the big risk and jump out there. Nicole, Linda, Teresa, all of you who have put this together and orchestrated it in front of the scenes and behind the scenes. It is terrific. Absolutely a terrific achievement on your part in short order time frame as well, I want to say. And also, I want to thank the sponsors. Our development team has done an outstanding job getting folks to sort of change lanes, if you will, and to sponsor this event. Our sponsors are American Solutions for Business, Cigna, Denver Management Advisors, HD Supply, the Home Depot Foundation, Juice Plus, Maddox and Associates, and Mayan Management. Great job in getting folks to really address this and embrace it the way they have. We can't thank our sponsors enough. And I want to thank the team that had the communication responsibility for getting in touch with people and reaching out to people. We are in for a treat today, an absolute treat today. We have with us Dr. Chris Bingham from the University of North Carolina. You've all seen the title of this address, The Plant and the Pivot. I love that basketball reference from that great school of North Carolina. How to build on our rich history and innovate for the future. And we have a very special guy, as I mentioned, widely published. One of the things that jumped off his resume at me was how, when he's been teaching inside the MBA school there at UNC, his class always gets voted as the best class of all the core classes out of that program. Well, he came well trained for that with a PhD from Stanford, a BS and MBA and MA from Brigham Young. Has done consulting and training for everyone from McKinsey Company to Deloitte, to 3M, Procter Gamble, FedEx, and including the U.S. Army, Navy, and Marines. There's no one that he hasn't touched inside the Pentagon as well as inside the private sector. I'm going to hand it off to Dr. Bingham. Thank you so much for doing this for us, Chris. We are looking forward to it.
Well, thanks, folks. It is a delight to be with you. I'm going to share my screen here. What a treat. What a treat to be with you today, to be able to be with individuals who are making a tremendous difference in the world. I love your mission. I love the good that you are doing. Thank you. I can imagine it's been a little tricky and challenging this last year with COVID. But let me ask you a question. Unexpected times often produce unexpected benefits. So in the chat, could you just jot down very quickly an unexpected benefit that you have seen or realized during this last year? It could be a personal benefit, could be something professional, but what's an unexpected positive outcome that you have received during this very unexpected time? Just jot a quick idea down. Love it. More time with family, more game night, Zoom times. And what's wonderful, and we've got a lot of people on the line, but look at the patterns. Look at the patterns in the comments. I'm grateful that even though a lot of things have been lost, a lot of things have been gained and found. Harvard just did an interesting survey with their undergraduates, and they asked, what do you want most in an employer? Now, typically when they ask this question, you can probably guess the results. They're going to say pay, flex time, work-life balance. Those things often bubble up to the very top. But when they ask the students this question, what do you want most in an employer? The interesting outcome here, the unexpected outcome, the student said, I want to work for an organization that helps people. I want to work for an organization that helps people. That was the number one thing. How cool is that, right? As an unexpected outcome. And you see this pro-social movement everywhere in the economy. Medical school applications are up 30, 40, 50, 60% at some schools. During very turbulent times, we often see the opportunity to make real impact as a leaders, perhaps more so than in calmer times. And honestly, that's why we're here. That's why we're here, folks, is to help you become a better leader, and to help you help others become better leaders. Now, there's a lot of words here on the slide, but ultimately that's what this is all about, to help you become a better leader and to help you help others become better leaders. So much of our learning and frankly, our life is about doing something or learning something. But what I want to stress is becoming something. The time will occur at some point in our lives when we need to change our focus from what we want to do in life to what we want to become in life. So I invite you to think about that question as we're spending this time together. Who do I want to become? What's the leader I want to be known for? And how can I help others become their best selves? How can I help others become their best selves? Clay Christensen, he's the guy that coined the term disruptive innovation. So if you've heard that term disruptive innovation, he came up with that term. He was a professor at Harvard Business School, and he passed away this last year. Now, in the last class with his MBA students, he would often take the theories about how to succeed in business and turn them on himself. Because if strategy is about being successful in the business world, well, then strategy should maybe apply to ourselves in terms of how we achieve success. And I loved one of the things that he would share with his students. This is actually captured in his book, which has sold more copies than his Innovator's Dilemma book. The book is called How Will You Measure Your Life? And there's a couple of quotes that I just wanted to share with you so that we can kind of get the bigger picture of what this is all about. He says to his students, and frankly to all of us, more and more MBA students coming to school thinking that a career in business means buying, selling, and investing in companies. That's unfortunate. Doing deals doesn't yield the rewards that come from building up people. Don't worry about the level of individual prominence you have achieved. Worry about the individuals you have helped become better people. This is my final recommendation. Think about the metric by which your life will be judged and make a resolution to live every day so that in the end, your life will be judged a success. Well, I'm grateful for Clay Christensen in reminding us, what this is all about. Today, I want to talk a little bit about what effective strategy or what effective leadership looks like when your environment starts to get turned upside down, when it starts to become much more dynamic. Now, how could you figure out if your environment, your workplace, the economy, the world is becoming more dynamic? One dimension of dynamism is velocity. The speed of things coming at you, it's just faster than ever. Things are obsolescing faster than ever. So I was talking with the general manager at an international hotel chain that all of you are familiar with. And he said to me one day, he said, it used to be that I could get back to guests within a day on email. Then I needed to get back to them within a few hours on voicemail. He said, now if I don't respond to guests within about 5 minutes via text, I'm in trouble. So like you see these windows that are just collapsing. You just don't have time for stuff anymore. So maybe that's what you're facing as a leader, just increase velocity. That's one dimension of dynamism. And maybe that's what you're facing. Another dimension is uncertainty, meaning even if you gave me time and money, I'm not sure if I could lift the fog and tell you what's going on a year from now, let alone 3 years from now. So maybe that's what you're facing as a leader. I was working with, one general, no, actually this was a VP at a consumer products company. And he said to me, I personally am overseeing 16 emerging markets. That's pretty uncertain. Then you've got unpredictability. Unpredictability basically means that the patterns that you use for doing things in the past are not necessarily going to work in the here and now. So maybe that's what you're facing as a leader. The things that have really worked over your last 125 years, maybe some of them are going to work going forward, but maybe some of them won't. That's unpredictability. And then you've got complexity as yet another dimension of dynamism. Complexity means lots of connected things, lots of things and lots of interconnected things that you need to get right in order to succeed. Now, this is where the general's comment came in. He said, I'm personally overseeing 12 healthcare systems in Asia Pacific for my troops. That's a pretty complex issue. So think about what you're facing as a leader. And what I want to do, you can see in the chat, I just dropped in a poll. I'd be curious what you are primarily facing as a leader. So just click on that link and you should be taken to this slide here. and give us a sense of what you're facing as a leader in terms of velocity, ambiguity, unpredictability, and complexity. So just quickly take that poll. Good, velocity jumped out, but unpredictability is sort of our front runner now. We've got 30 of you responding, almost 40 now, 50. Good, keep it up. Now it's interesting, and perhaps this is not surprising, but unpredictability is out front, complexity close behind. But the reality is, with about 100 of you responding, you're facing all of this. You're facing all of this. In fact, most of you it's a cocktail of all of the above. Velocity, uncertainty, ambiguity, unpredictability, complexity, all of this stuff. Now, this was a decent question that I'm asking you. You know, what are you experiencing as a leader? And you can see again, after about 137 responses, most of you are saying, hey, I'm getting this across the board. In other words, my environment is becoming more and more dynamic. But perhaps the better question is this next one, and that is, what are the effects of this? What are the effects of increased dynamism? Now, again, this is a word cloud, so just share in Menti. You can drop in a descriptive term. How is this increased dynamism, this velocity, uncertainty, unpredictability, complexity, how is that impacting you and your teams? Just drop in a few words to Menti that describe the impact. Good, juggling, frantic. Feel free to drop as many words as you'd like in here. There's not a limit to you. But just do it in Menti. Some of you are using the chat feature. That's okay, but try to use Menti so that we can all visually see how these words connect to each other. Now, again, the point of a word cloud is that the more the word is mentioned, the more central it is on our screen and the larger it is. So again, if you look front and center, that stress has been there from the beginning, and it's just getting larger and more dominant. And then you can see, of course, with almost 100 of you already responding, there's a lot of related cousins: uncertainty, burnout, confusion, overwhelmed, fear, frustration. So I think the picture that these two polls are showing for us is, one, we're experiencing increased dynamism in the workplace. And two, by and large, the effect is not positive. By and large, it is not positive. Well, these are great, great responses. Perhaps the most relevant question of all is not, are you experiencing this? Not what are its effects, but how are you dealing with this? How are you coping with this? So could you just share something in the chat, really short, really succinct? How are you coping with increased dynamism? We know you're facing it. We know it's not having a positive effect. How are you dealing with this? Besides just maybe increased alcohol consumption, I'm like, how are you dealing with this? Prayer, managing, prioritization, good, faith, self-care, meditation. This is great. This is great. One of the things that you'll often hear people mention, and you can kind of see it in the chat that's coming through, is we got to adapt, we got to change, we got to be agile, is you'll hear this term pivot, and that's why it's in the slide, right? In the slide title. We got to pivot. When things are changing and they're dynamic, we've got to pivot. But remember where that comes from. As Mike said, that comes from basketball. And with pivot, you've got a leg that's sort of moving around. But people forget when they're talking about the pivot, there's actually another leg there. And that leg is planted. That leg is planted. So the insight is the pivot, the plant allows the pivot. The stability allows the change. The stability allows the change. If you are looking at highly resilient individuals and teams and organizations, there is something stable that allows them to change. There's the plant foot and there's the pivot foot. But what is that in an organization? For individuals, it could be your faith, your family, your friends. Something has got to stay core to allow you to change. But that's tricky. That's very tricky in a dynamic environment. What is the plant leg? What is the pivot leg? And sometimes in our attempts to deal with dynamism, we actually make it worse. For example, supposedly during British rule of colonial India, there was an overabundance of venomous snakes. So the leaders had this beautiful idea that they were going to put in place a bounty system where you could get paid for bringing them a dead cobra. Well, some bright locals, enterprising locals, just started raising cobras, which of course, it made the problem worse. And then when they got rid of the bounty system, these locals just released the cobras into the community, which of course exacerbated the problem even more. They actually call this the cobra effect. It's when our solutions make the problems worse, not better. So maybe you've seen this. For example, in our attempts to simplify complexity, we actually make things more complex. We actually make it worse, not better. Well, I've been dealing with this question for about 2 decades now. What is effective strategy? What does effective leadership look like when your world starts to get turned upside down, when it starts to become a lot more dynamic? And the counterintuitive insight, as I've been working with large organizations, small organizations, for-profits and nonprofits, is that when our environment becomes increasingly dynamic and complex, the best strategies are the most simple. They're the most simple. So let me drive home this premise, if I may, for just a second. So this is the story of Sergeant Edward Montoya. At the time of this story, Sergeant Montoya is stationed in Mosul, Iraq, and he's in line in the mess hall to get some dessert, cheesecake specifically, and a terrorist blows himself up. Now, Sergeant Montoya is smart enough to dive under a table, but when he comes up, it's just chaos and carnage. Now, recognize this is a very dynamic situation. He doesn't know what's going on in the mess hall, let alone outside of the mess hall, but he has to make some decisions, and he has to make some decisions very quickly. Sergeant Montoya is an Army medic, so he's got to figure out, who am I going to help now? Who am I going to help later? And sadly, who's beyond help? So put yourself in his shoes. Put yourself in his shoes. What would you do? Maybe jot one idea down in the chat. What would you do? What would you do? Help the first person you see, build a quick team, triage. Yeah, great suggestions in here. It turns out that Sergeant Montoya actually did what some of you note in the chat. He relied on a few simple rules for triage, such as, can the patient follow instructions? Does the patient have a pulse rate below 120 or respiratory rate between 10 and 30 breaths per minute? This is not a complicated plan. He doesn't have time for that. Okay, new context. You're a police chief. You're trying to stop someone from repeating crimes in your area. Now, you could come up with a complicated algorithm to stop this individual, or you may be more likely to catch him or her by relying on the simple rule of take the midpoint of the 2 most recent crime scenes. So we've got simple rules in medicine. We've got them in criminology. What about nature? Does nature give us any indication of the power of simplicity and simple rules in particular? It absolutely does. So if you've ever seen the flocking of birds, this sort of the swarming of buffalo, the herding of buffalo, the swarming of fish, what you're going to see is complex adaptive behavior. Now, Craig Reynolds at MIT was able to simulate the flocking behavior of these starlings, these small birds, with 3 simple rules: avoid collisions, head in the same direction as your nearest neighbors, and stay close to your nearest neighbors. Now, the reason they call this complex adaptive behavior is that each bird is acting autonomously. It's using those rules individually, but there's a collective level benefit for the entire flock in that they'll fly in and around buildings, they'll avoid hawks and falcons. And the interesting thing is there's not even a central leader, but it's highly adaptive for the collective. In fact, you heard the person that was taking this video. He says, there's the peregrine falcon. You can actually see the peregrine falcon at the top of your screen. The peregrine falcon cannot zero in on one particular bird, even though these birds are just acting on their own. So it's highly adaptive for the collective. The scientific journal Nature picked up on this not too long ago when it was describing the adaptiveness of ants. So when ants go out to forage, they'll often face sort of a gap that they need to cross. And they'll build a bridge with their bodies driven by the simple rule: as long as someone walks over you, you stay put. So that's probably a good rule for ants, maybe not good for us in our organizations, but works really well for ants. So what are these things, these simple rules? These are shortcuts that help us save time and attention. We often refer to them as rules of thumb, rules of thumb. Yet most rules of thumb are implicit. And what I'm saying is we need to make them explicit and known in our lives and in our teams and in our organizations. Now, I haven't really given you any organizational examples. So you might say, well, that's great that birds use those and ants use those, but how can I as a leader in a large organization use these? Well, let me give you an example about how organizations can benefit from simple rules. This is Coldplay. Coldplay is pretty interesting because they have the rare distinction of having what's called a double-double, a number one single and a number one album on both sides of the Atlantic. That's actually very rare. In fact, the last person that had a double-double was Rod Stewart. So it just tells you it's been a little while. Now, Coldplay actually relies on a few simple rules to drive its band's superior performance, to help them perform exceptionally well in an industry, the music industry, that definitely requires change and adaptation, an industry that is very dynamic. So let me play this video clip for you, and you'll get a sense of how Coldplay benefits from simple rules.
London, just before Christmas. Soaring melodies, the thumping beat of the music, and the quirky charisma of lead singer Chris Martin had the crowd on its feet.
We rely more on enthusiasm than actual skill. Whatever you do, do it enthusiastically and people like it more. I can't dance like Usher, I can't sing like Beyonce, I can't write songs like Elton John. But we can do the best we can with what we've got. And so that's what we did, we just go for it.
They're all barely 30, but they've already been together for 12 years. Martin and guitarist Johnny Buckland, bass player Guy Berryman, and drummer Will Champion. By the time this tour ends, they will have played before 3 million people, but you wouldn't know it from talking to them. When we first met Martin and Buckland at this pub in Northwest London, which served as their first office, we found them modest and self-effacing.
Look, you guys are one of the biggest groups in the world right now. How did that happen?
There's a lot of people asking the same question.
All we do is we try really, really hard.
The other reason why we're doing well is because you two are still on holiday. So
They're back in March.
they're back in March, so as soon as they come back, we drop down the ladder a bit. So really our last week of substitute teaching.
Someone wrote that Chris Martin is like watching an unsteady trapeze act. One moment brimming with self-confidence, anxious and angst-ridden the next.
Well, Steve, this is our home.
We saw some of it at the band's Camden recording studio, where he was both structured and random, a bundle of kinetic energy, always on the move.
One of the things that surprises me is you're out on tour. You're not even finished with this tour, and you're already working on the next album.
Yeah.
Take a break.
Take a break when I'm 40 or 35.
Not that.
Not now. I've got to keep writing songs as long as I've got hair. Because once it goes, then I won't be able to go on stage.
He's a compulsive worrier and list maker. He sends himself electronic messages and scrawls notes on scraps of paper, on his hands, and anything else that's available, lest he forgets some brilliant idea.
You have notes written on the piano.
Yeah, but this is just the beginning. So in 6 months, it will be covered, I think.
And you have to repaint the piano?
Yeah. When we finish something, we'll repaint.
Like many artists, he is openly, gloriously neurotic.
Then we have all our rules here. We've got our rules. So you can't have more than 42 minutes. These are just things we have to remind ourselves all the time. The rules are important. See, look at rule number 6. Not many interviews. That's a rule.
Always keep mystery.
Always keep mystery. I feel like I've shown you my underpants. This is private stuff.
All right. So, so there's a screenshot of the rules. And you heard Chris Martin, the lead singer, say, you heard this quote at the bottom. Then we have all our rules here. We've got our rules. So you can't have more than 42 minutes. He's referring to rule number 1 at the top. These are just things you have to remind yourselves of all the time. The rules are important. All right, in the chat, how are the rules important? What are they doing for Coldplay? How are they helping them? Just write something that you think might answer that question. How are the rules helping them? He says they're important. How so? Focus, keep them focused. Map, security, good. Channel, consistency, structure, provides a framework. Great. And again, you're seeing some consistency in these remarks that are coming in, keeping focused. So that if we didn't have these rules, we could maybe go off course, okay? We become unfocused. We wouldn't have structured decision-making. Yep, you're on it, you're on it. All organizations, big, small, for-profit, nonprofit, they all face a fundamental tension. And that tension is between efficiency on the one hand and flexibility on the other hand. Efficiency is about exploitation. It's about doing well in the here and now. It's about driving variance out of processes. But if you're just on that side, you're going to have no future. By contrast, flexibility is about exploration, not exploitation, exploration. It's about adapting to the future. But if you're just focused on that world, you're not going to make payroll next week. Now, this is not a simple Goldilocks dilemma where you're like, well, I want to be both efficient and flexible. I want to be able to exploit and explore. I want to be both the plant and the pivot. I want to be able to build off the past and innovate in the future, because the tension rests on what happens to organizations over time. Where do organizations drift over time? Do they drift towards efficiency and exploitation, or do they drift towards flexibility and exploration? What do you think? Just drop it in the chat. Where do they drift? Towards efficiency and exploitation, or towards flexibility and exploration? Which way do they go? Yep, you're right. They go that way, efficiency. How do you know? I'll tell you how you know. More policies, more manuals, more procedures, more rule books. That's that, folks. That's more efficiency. Now, that's not a problem. That drift towards efficiency is not a problem if your environment is pretty stable, if the past is a pretty good predictor of the future. For example, if you're going to be a McDonald's franchisee, they're going to give you a 380 plus page manual that's going to tell you exactly what to do from day to day, because that's a pretty consistent experience. If you're going to open up an IKEA store, they're going to tell you exactly the footprint of the store, how many rooms should be in the store, and honestly, what should be hung in each room to the inch, because that's a pretty consistent experience. But that's not the environment that you just described to me about 15 minutes ago. That's not the dynamic world that you just told me about, that you're facing as leaders. So the challenge is that organizations naturally drift towards efficiency and exploitation at the very expense of the things that we need to adapt for the future, flexibility and exploration. So my question to you is, how do simple rules balance this tension between efficiency and flexibility? In other words, how do simple rules give you both efficiency and flexibility? How do they give you both? Take a look at the rules. Take a look at the rules. What are the rules telling you, and what are they not telling you? So look at rule number 6, for example. This was mentioned in the video. Always keep mystery, not many interviews. What is that telling you? What is it not telling you? What it's not telling you is how many interviews. So notice, folks, that those rules here are strict. They're strict, but not restrictive. They give you some structure so that we capture the benefits of the past, so that there's some efficiency. But within that structure that exists, there's a lot of latitude to adjust. There's a lot of opportunity to flexibly improvise. Strict but not restrictive. Some but not too much structure. So could be 6 interviews this time, could be 12 interviews next month, could be 13 the month after that. You're just going to have to figure it out. Strict but not restrictive, some but not too much structure. Okay. Now here's another organization that you might have heard of. This is IDEO. IDEO is probably the premier product design firm in the world. If you brush your teeth with a toothbrush that looks like the one on the screen with a squishy handle, the folks at IDEO designed it. If you used any of the early products from Apple, they designed those. If you saw the movie Free Willy with that mechanical whale that jumps over the wall, they designed that too. They design hundreds of products that you and I take for granted every day. Now, it doesn't matter the product that IDEO is given to design. They will rely on a few simple rules for brainstorming, and these rules are just pasted all around their building. Defer judgment, encourage wild ideas, build on the ideas of others, stay focused on the topic, one conversation at a time, be visual, and go for quantity. Now, again, I'll just ask the same question. How are these rules strict but not restrictive? How do they give you some structure but not too much structure? Well, you might say, well, be visual. It's going to be different for you than it is for me. So there's some structure, but we have the opportunity to flexibly improvise what that means. Okay. Be visual for Mike is going to be different than be visual for Chris Bingham. Let me tell you one of my favorite rules, and it's the last one. Go for quantity. Now, it's hard to do sort of a raise of hand in this environment, but my guess is if I asked you how many of you have been involved in a brainstorming session, almost all of your hands would probably go up. Here's a typical brainstorming session. Hey, folks, thanks for coming together. We've got an hour to talk about topic X. Let's get your ideas on the board. Now, put yourself in that situation, because again, you've been in that situation before. Who are usually the first people to raise their hands and get their ideas on the board? It's usually the senior people in the organization, right? So the senior people says, I think we ought to do this. And the junior people say, great idea. I love that idea. I was going to say the same thing. I promise. I really was. So instead of a brainstorming session where the whole goal is to surface lots of unique and diverse ideas, what often happens in most organizations is that the senior people suggest a few thoughts and then power factions form around those few thoughts. At IDEO, it's not uncommon for them in a 60-minute brainstorming session to come up with more than 100 unique ideas for something in a 60-minute brainstorming session, simply by following that last rule, go for quantity. Notice what happens when you go for quantity. Very quickly, it starts to depersonalize the process. Now it starts to become a lot more objective instead of subjective. Now we can actually vote for the best idea instead of someone's pet project. So it's not going to strip power completely out of the process, but it will mitigate it. So that rule alone, in my opinion, is worth its weight in gold. Now, if we step back, there's a couple of features of simple rules. First, by their very definition, they're few, not many. What I usually see is maybe 4 to 8 rules, and these rules apply to a particular process or activity. So bottom right-hand corner there. These are not vision statements or mission statements like do no evil that apply to everything the organization does. No, the more specific the process or the activity, better. So onboarding, partnering, acquiring, those types of processes. And importantly, your rules are not my rules. We both have we have different experience bases and histories, so we can both benefit from simple rules, but we don't have to use the same simple rules. So let me give you a couple examples of these points. This is Michael Pollan. He is a professor of journalism at UC Berkeley. He has written The Botany of Desire, The Omnivore's Dilemma. He's got a show on Netflix. Now, I'm not sure if Michael Pollan's rules for dieting are on any of your refrigerator magnets at home, but they are on a lot of refrigerator magnets. Eat real food that your grandmother would recognize, eat small portions, eat mostly plants. Now, is there some flexibility there? Yeah. You like kale, I like spinach. All right, that works for both of us. But notice how Michael Pollan's rules for eating differ from the Stanford football teams. These are big boys that are often staying up late and sleeping in late, and so missing that critical meal of the day. So rule number 1 is always eat breakfast. They're working hard on the field. They can get dehydrated, and that's going to affect their performance. So rule number 2 is always stay hydrated. And rule number 3, eat as much as you want and anything you want, as long as you can pick it, pluck it, or kill it. Now, are there any thematic ties between the Stanford football team's rules for eating and Michael Pollan's? Besides 3, what themes do you see between these two? If you see a theme, just let me know in the chat. Flexibility. Yeah, Carrie kind of nailed it real quickly, which is natural foods. So what you can see is like, don't eat processed foods, right? But notice how Michael Pollan, as a middle-aged man, is at a very different time in his life than these guys. These guys need to eat a lot more and a lot more protein. So the point is we can both benefit from simple rules, but they don't have to be the same simple rules. Now, as I've been working with organizations, big and small, I've tried to induce a typology of rules. In other words, are there just common rule categories out there? First, you have what are called boundary rules. It's basically saying within these boundaries, we're going to do stuff. Outside of those boundaries, we're not going to do that. We're not going to pursue it. So Cisco grew very successfully through acquisitions. The company's strategy was basically synonymous with acquisitions. In its early years, Cisco followed a very simple acquisition rule. They call it the 75-75 rule. Don't acquire companies with more than 75 employees, 75% of which have to be engineers. Boom, there's your boundaries. Within those boundaries, knock yourself out. Amazon.com has what they call a 2-pizza team rule. If the team cannot be fed with 2 pizzas, too big, got to make it smaller. Now you see some adaptations of that. Some other companies have like a dozen bagel teams, et cetera. But the point is they're putting some boundaries on activities. Then you've got how-to rules, how we're going to do things within our boundaries. Again, I would like to do this by show of hands, but I can't see your hands. But my guess is that many of you have used Airbnb before. Now, if you want to be a host and you want to let people stay in your home, whether you're in Pittsburgh or Paris or Perth or sort of anywhere across the world, Airbnb is going to give you a few how-to rules for being a host. Rule number 1, use professional photographs. Rule number 2, give local tips. Like, where's the farmer's market? Where's the subway station? Because who does Airbnb not want to be? They don't want to be a hotel. They don't want to be a hotel at all, right? And then rule number 3 is pretty funny. If you want to let someone stay in your home, you're going to remember to vacuum your carpets and clean your sinks, but you'll often forget to take the soap out of your shower or your tub. And when someone else stays in your home and they see your soap in your shower tub, it has a real ick factor, for you and me. So rule number 3 is always have fresh soap. So use professional photographs, give local tips, have fresh soap. Doesn't matter where you are. Here's another one that you might be familiar with. During this pandemic, I have gone to Chick-fil-A quite a bit for my family. So you go to Chick-fil-A, you order your food, you pick up your food at the window and you say, thanks a lot to them. And whoever's attending you responds by saying what? What do they say? What do they say? My pleasure. You got it, Mally. Yep, my pleasure. They will not say you're welcome. They will always say my pleasure. It's a simple customer service rule, right? Priority rules. What we're going to do first versus second or third. I was working with a supply chain software company out of Silicon Valley that was starting to enter international markets. Its priority rule was English-speaking markets first. The logic was we don't know a whole lot about internationalization, so we're going to start slowly and incrementally in culturally similar markets like Canada, UK, Australia, and then go from there. Timing rules, how we move from one thing to the next. Pixar has a very explicit timing rule. Release a new feature-length film every year, and it's almost always at the beginning of the holiday season. What's Apple's timing rule? When do they almost always release a majority of their products? See if you can figure this one out. When does Apple almost always release a majority of their products? Yep, a lot of you kind of got the season, October, September. It's usually September. Yeah, usually September. Yeah, you got it. By contrast, Samsung sort of has a March and September sort of timing rule. Now, these timing rules are especially important in dynamic environments where there's a tendency to spend too much time or too little time on activities. So here's another term that you've probably heard in your organization, that is core competencies. We got to build our core competencies. We got to leverage our core competencies. We got to exploit our core competencies. Now, the term core competence comes from a Harvard Business Review article. It's a 1990 article called The Core Competence of the Corporation by C.K. Prahalad and Gary Hamel. It is the single most popular Harvard Business Review article of all time. So not surprisingly, it gets used in like every business school around the world. But again, let's think about this term, core competence. And let's start with just competence. How do we get competent at anything? Practice, right? You do it once, I'm okay at it. The more I do it, the better I get at it. The better I get at something, the more I want to do it again. So that's how something moves from a competence to a core competence in an organization. An organization builds up a skill or a knowledge base or an expertise. The more it utilizes it, the better it gets at it. The better it gets at it, the more it wants to utilize it in different parts of the organization. So over time, this skill, this knowledge base, this expertise gets weaved into the fabric and DNA of the organization. That makes sense, right? Now here's the twist. Core competencies can actually become core rigidities. The very thing that allowed you to succeed can actually cause your demise. Why? Well, you overexploit it past its useful life. Because in a dynamic environment, you cannot plan on sustained advantage. What you're after are temporary wins. Take advantage of the window while it's open, just like surfing. I don't know how long the wave's going to last. I don't know how many waves are going to be in the set, but I'm just going to go for it, right? You can't plan on sustained advantage. So timing rules help avoid core competencies becoming core rigidities. I mean, a good example of a company where a core competency became a core rigidity is Chrysler. Chrysler was the very first company to come out with an SUV, the Jeep Wagoneer in the 60s. The very first company to come out with a minivan. Between 1980 and 2000, Chrysler sold more than 10 million minivans worldwide. Then they've got Durango, they've got Dakota, they've got Ram. Basically, they are the heavy truck company in the world. That's their core competency. So fuel efficiency starts to become more important around 2000. What does Chrysler do? Not much. In fact, they doubled down on those heavy truck capabilities. They built Hemis, for crying out loud. How did that work out for them? Not so great. So again, these timing rules help us make sure that we're adapting to the future. Finally, you've got stopping rules. These help us avoid escalating commitment to underperforming causes. So GE had the famous stopping rule. If we're not one or two in this business, we're out. I know other executives that say something like, if we have more than a year or two of losses in this venture, we're done. Ferrari has an 8,000 stopping rule. After we produce 8,000 cars, we're done. But look at the rules collectively. This is sort of the bigger point. Boundary, how to, priority, timing, stopping. This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. This is what we'll do first. This is how we'll move from one thing to the next. And this is when we're going to stop. What does that sound like to you? What does that sound like to you? Here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to do it. This is what we'll do first. This is how we'll move from one thing to the next. This is when we'll stop. What does that sound like to you? What am I describing? Just in the chat, suggest a couple thoughts. Yes. Hopscotch. Yeah, I love that one. A plan, hyper controlling, simple rules. Yeah, they are simple rules. It's a strategy, folks. It's a strategy. It is a strategy, but it's not a complicated strategy. Now, here's a very important question that you all have insight on. Why is it that great strategies often fail to have any meaningful impact in organizations? So again, just in the chat, why is it that great strategies often fail to have any meaningful impact in organizations? Yeah, you guys are nailing it in the chat. Absolutely right. Too complex. One of the reasons that great strategies often fail to have any meaningful impact in organizations has to do with the strategy itself. For any strategy to be implemented or executed, it needs to be understood. In order for it to be understood, it needs to be remembered. And in order for it to be remembered, it needs to be simple. Yeah. A strategy that is too complex or too complicated to remember is not a strategy, my friends. That is a book report. That's a book report. So what we're trying to do is distill what are often really complex strategies into their simple essence. A few simple rules across a few categories so that they can be understood, remembered, and thus implemented. Sometimes I'm working with organizations that are operating in sort of dynamic environments, and I'll pass out 3x5 cards and I'll say, write down your enterprise strategy. And then I collect those cards. How many different strategies do you think I get? It's like the number of participants in the room, right? I mean, how could we ever hope to implement strategy if we're all on a different page? But if there's just a few things we have to remember, oh yeah, I can remember that. I can remember that. And if I can remember that, then I can actually implement it. North Carolina has a state fair in the fall. My guess is that some of you have been to different state fairs. At the North Carolina State Fair, occasionally they'll have a livestock section. And in the livestock arena, they will often have an oxen pull. So you walk in and the contest is there's a yoke that hooks up, a pair of oxen, and there's a big metal sled behind them. And what they do is they put more and more weight on that sled, and they see which pair of oxen can drag that sled the furthest. Now, when you first walk in the arena, you're thinking, oh, it's got to be the biggest, burliest pair of oxen that can drag the sled the furthest. But they're often not the winners. It's often a smaller pair of oxen who hit that yoke, boom, at exactly the same time. They're perfectly aligned when they hit that yoke, and that moves the sled forward. That's what we're trying to do as teams, folks, and organizations. We got to be aligned so that we can hit stuff together. But if we're all have different conceptions of strategy, well, there's no way we're going to be able to get aligned and move things forward. Now, I've spent a fair amount of time talking about this idea of simple rules and trying to motivate it. But what value are you seeing as leaders? Could you just share something in the chat? What value are you seeing in simple rules? How could they help you as a leader? Maybe just share a thought or two in the chat. Tames the chaos. Love that language. That's poetic. Prevent overthinking, quicker decision-making, framework, better buy-in, concise, easy to remember. Absolutely. Motivation creates buy-in. So this is an interesting one. So many of you are mentioning the alignment piece, and that's really important. In a dynamic environment where there's a lot of chaos and turbulence, we need to get our people aligned, and having them remember a few rules that can get them aligned. But some of you are even mentioning empowerment or motivation. And that's equally important. So I read this really, really sobering and sad statistic from The Economist magazine a couple months ago. And the statistic was this: 25% of the world's workforce feels engaged. 25%. Think how sad that is, right? Think about how much of our lives we spend at work, and 25% of people are feeling engaged. Now, it's a little higher in North America, a little lower in Europe, but overall about 25%. That's really sad. But notice if I come up to you and I say to Joy, hey, Joy, you're over partnerships. Now, Joy, here are your simple rules. Don't do a deal if it jeopardizes the user experience, no exclusive deals, and the product or service must be free. By the way, those were Yahoo's partnership rules. How is Joy feeling? How's Joy feeling? She's probably feeling pretty empowered because I really haven't told her how to do this. I've given her some rough instructions, some rough guidelines, but I'll kind of leave it up to her. What am I saying about me as a leader when I give Joy those simple rules? I trust you. You're smart. Yep, you got it. Everyone, right off the bat, trust. I trust you. You're smart. You'll figure this out. Let me know how I can help you. So it's not just alignment. Yes, simple rules get us aligned, but they can also empower, they can inspire, they can motivate people. And that's what we need in a dynamic environment, the alignment and the empowerment. Now, in some research that I've done on the relationship between structure and performance, you see this relationship. Now, structure very simply defined is something that constrains action. That's how you define structure, something that constrains action. Forms of structure are rules, manuals, policies, routines. Those are forms of structure, but structure is just something that constrains action. And what you see here in this is a mathematical simulation, is that some structure is useful, too much structure, not so great. Okay. And again, the intuition for the downward slope here is that too much structure creates inertia, bureaucracy. It makes it difficult to change. So my question to you, which we're going to do through a poll, and so if we can launch the poll, please, is where are you on this graph? Okay. So just take this quick poll. Where do you think you are on this graph? Too little structure, just the right amount of structure, or we kind of got a little too much structure? So just take the quick poll. We're going to give you about 30 seconds to take this, and then we'll close it out. Okay, I think we're ready to close out the poll and show the results. There we go. So some of you are saying, hey, we're kind of too little structure. A lot of you are feeling like you're kind of in this nice sweet spot, but a number of you, 23%, are saying we're kind of on that right tail. For those of you that are saying 6 and above, in other words, I'm just kind of drowning in structure. I'm just kind of drowning this. The implication for you as leaders is you've got to find a way to pare back. You've got to find a way to pare back. I was doing some research with Dow Chemical. Dow had a 2,000-page manual for its acquisitions. It was crazy. It was stifling adaptation and implementation. Dow had to strip big pieces of the methodology out to force more mindful engagement. But some of you, 18% of you, are saying you're on the other side. And notice, if you can see my cursor, notice that you're actually punished more for not having structure. You see this drop off here in performance? You're actually punished more for not having structure. Many of you have been involved in new things, new services, new initiatives, new geographies. That can be kind of exciting, but it can also be frustrating, fatiguing, confusing, because you don't have structure. So if you are in this world, like the 1 to 2 world, or you're leading people in that world, the implication for you is you need to get some structure, not too much, but you need to impose some structure. Now, some of you are thinking, well, I'm just in the sweet spot of 3 to 5. I'm great. Well, not really, because this slope is like a greased slippery slide. Before you know it, you're down at the bottom. Because remember, organizations just keep adding structure over time. It's structure creep. So it's kind of like if you've ever been river rafting. If you are doing nothing, you're going downstream. So you have to actively manage that structure in order to stay there. Now, folks, this has been sort of a theoretical discussion. As we kind of close out our session together, I want to push this into practical reality. Take 20 seconds and think about simple rules that you have for exercise. You don't need to share them in the chat, but just think about some simple rules that you have for exercise. This is probably important to all of us, keeping our bodies somewhat fit. Think about what you do, how you do it, what takes priority, how long you do it, when you stop. I bet you do have some simple rules. You've just never made them explicit. You've just probably never written them down. So think about a few simple rules that you might follow for exercise. Now, maybe just share one quickly in the chat. What's just maybe one simple rule that you follow for exercise? 30 minutes daily, consistency. Yeah, daily. Now notice, like 30 minutes, it's strict but not restrictive. You're not telling us what you're going to do for that 30 minutes or when you're going to meet that 30 minutes or 10,000 steps a day, how you're going to do that or which days, what your activities you're going to do. But the point is that the structure is helping you get more out of exercise. Some of you are saying, well, I don't need simple rules for exercise. I'll just do it. Well, for those of you, you're over here on the left. Those of you that are saying, I don't need simple rules for exercise, you're over here. Most of us are not going to have too many rules for exercise, but if we just imposed a little bit more structure on this activity, exercise, we'd probably get a lot more out of it. Now that's exercise. I want to skip over sort of family relations, but let me just get to maybe one other application, and that is your calendar. Your calendar. Now this is not my calendar, but my calendar might look something like this. Think about what simple rules you use to organize your calendar. What gets on there? How long it stays on there, what takes priority, when you stop, when you organize, when you take lunch, when you take breaks, when you start work. Again, chances are you probably have some rules, you've just never made them explicit. So just, again, take 30 seconds and on your own, you don't need to share these in the chat, jot down a few simple rules you use for following your calendar, for organizing your calendar. One of Jeff Bezos' rule for his calendar is no meetings before 10 a.m. And his logic is, as leaders, we're called to go deep on a few meaty issues, not skate thinly on lots of issues. So no meetings before 10, pardon me. And I want the 10 a.m. meeting the most cognitively intense of the day. Again, I don't know what your rules are. But if we don't have simple rules for organizing our calendar, we get to the end of a day, end of a week, and we're like, oh, I'm so frustrated. I got nothing done. It's because our calendar just took over. So this is not a class on calendaring. It's not a class on exercise. I only share these applications because the value of any tool or framework is when it starts to have immediate benefit in all areas of our life. And that's what I love about these simple rules. It helps me in all areas of my life. Folks, you are all so darn busy. The very fact that you're on this session right now means your email box is blowing up. I totally get it. I totally understand. So I have to give you a tool that's fast and frugal to implement, quick and easy, that has immediate benefits for you. And that's what the simple rules framework has been for me. So as we wrap up together, the counterintuitive insight that we're coming back to is that when our environments become more dynamic and more complex, the best strategies are the most simple. You're starting to understand the intuition for this a little bit more. First, simple rules balance that tension between efficiency and flexibility. There's some, but not too much structure. They're strict, but not restrictive, right? 2 pizza teams. Well, that could be 3 people, could be 5 people, could be 2 people. You figure it out. It's probably going to change over time so that we're capturing the benefits of the past, but we're also able to innovate and change for the future. Bottom left, they produce better decisions. It's because we're not overweighting structure from the past to the present. That doesn't work in a dynamic environment where the past is not a good predictor of the future. Upper right, simple rules promote collective behavior. Because they're simple, they can be understood and remembered across a geographically dispersed workforce. Moreover, they're things that we can remember even if we are tired and stressed and anxious. Because what often happens to structure when we're in firefighting mode? It gets thrown out the window, right? I'm just going to get the darn thing done. But if there's just a few things you have to remember, well, you can remember these things even if you're tired and stressed and anxious. This last point, bottom right-hand corner, is actually quite intriguing. That is the simplicity of the rules makes them hard to imitate. The field of operations is about doing things well. That's what operations is about, operations management, doing things well. Strategy is about doing it better than someone else. It's not enough to do it well. You actually have to do it better than someone else in order to create an advantage for yourself. And if someone cannot imitate you, well, then you can extend your advantage more over time. You are competing for the best talent and the resources in the game. So yeah, even though you're a nonprofit, you're still competing. You're still competing. And interestingly, the simplicity of the rules makes them hard to imitate because if you've ever seen good improvisers, we often have the false notion that they are winging it, like making it up on the fly. That's actually not true. They are improvising off of an underlying structure that you and I cannot see. In jazz, it's an underlying chord or an underlying melody, but we don't see that. All we see is the improvised outcome. But what we're trying to do as leaders is use these simple rules as that underlying improvisational referent, that underlying structure off of which we can improvise. For example, this is a company in Singapore that this is a security software company. And one of their simple rules was target large organizations with proprietary data. Well, in Singapore, they go after government and banks. In Malaysia, it was big insurance companies. In Japan, global manufacturing firms, China, state-owned enterprises, and Saudi Arabia, big oil. Now, if you look at the customer base of this company, you're like, what are they doing? They're all over the place. It looks like there's zero coherence in the customer base. But the reality is every one of these customers is internally consistent with this rule. But a competitor can't see that rule. All they see is what appears to be a random customer base. So this company, again, is improvising just like good improvisers in jazz and comedy and using the simple rules to provide that underlying structure. So as we wrap up together, I want to close with 3 questions. What, so what, now what? I hope there has been something that has resonated with you, something that can help you become a better leader and help others become better leaders. Let me invite you to just quickly respond with your pen and paper or whatever you're using to capture notes to 2 small questions. 1, so here's the first one. And again, just maybe jot down the first idea that comes into your mind. What am I doing now that I should not be doing? Based on ideas that have come to me today, based on some of the knowledge, what am I doing now that I should not be doing? Okay, now here's the companion question. What am I not doing now that I should be doing? What am I not doing now that I should be doing? I know that if you just implement on those two small ideas that came to you from those two questions, there's some big effects for you in the future. Let me wrap up with a story. I started with a story, so let me close with a story. There once was a man who dreamed of sailing the Mediterranean. He'd always wanted to see Rome and Athens and Istanbul, so he saved up his money, and when he had enough money, he booked passage on a ship. But because money was tight, he brought along an extra suitcase. And in that suitcase, he packed some crackers and some beans and some powdered lemonade, and that was going to be his food on the ship. He saw Rome, he saw Athens, he saw Istanbul. I mean, they were amazing. Everything that he'd always dreamed that they would be. But for the most part, when he was at sea, he stayed in his cabin and ate his humble food. He wanted to take part in the ship's activities. He wanted to do the shuffleboard. He wanted to go swimming. He wanted to see the shows at night. And he just dreamed for a taste of the food that he saw on the ship. Every meal seemed to be this unbelievable feast. But because money was tight, he stayed in his cabin and ate his crackers and beans and drank his lemonade. On the last night of the cruise, a member of the ship crew came to him and asked which party he'd be joining that night. And it was only then that he learned that everything on the ship was included in the price of his ticket. Yep, too late, he learned that he was living below his privileges. And I really like the story because you have the privilege of being a leader. So how are you making a difference? Leadership, as we know, is not a reward, it's a responsibility. So let's do something. Let's take this tool and framework and let's make work better. Is it going to go great the first time you implement it with your teams or even on your own? No, but you just stick with it. You're going to have a little voice in the back of your head saying, you don't need something new. You're busy. You don't have time to implement something new. You got to shove that little voice aside because if not you, then who? If not you, then who? So you can do this. Start small. Make it simple, give it time. That's how we change. Start small, make it simple, give it time. If I can help in this change effort, let me know. You guys have been terrific. Thank you for letting me share some of these ideas. I'll turn it back to you, Mike, to wrap it up. And thanks for letting me go over a minute or two.
Hey, thank you. That was awesome. You could always go for a minute or two with us. That was fantastic. Chris, loved it. Absolutely loved it. Still have the questions and as well as that theme to take with us about don't live below your privileges. That is awesome. Fantastic job. Thank you to everybody who joined in on this. This was a huge success from the registration, the content, everything about it. Stay tuned. We will do this again on May the 12th, and added significance to that is we'll be giving out our awards, which usually happen at a nice luncheon at the national conference when we come together physically and in person. So thanks again, and we will see everyone again in just a few weeks. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Puede vencer la sequía y para qué llorar.